Welcome, to the Haunted Tales, brave souls, to another chilling journey into the unknown. Tonight, we venture deep into the heart of Alabama, a land rich in history, mystery, and spine-tingling terror. From haunted bridges to ghostly plantations, these locations have left many trembling in fear. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself for the most haunted places in Alabama. The fire still burns. Birmingham, Alabama, was built on iron and sweat, and nowhere was that more apparent than at Sloss Furnaces, a massive industrial complex that once roared with fire, metal, and the cries of overworked laborers. Though the furnaces had long been abandoned, their legacy remained, along with something else. Nathan Carter knew all about the stories. The ghosts, the shadows, the screams. Local legends whispered of the spirits of workers who met gruesome ends in the ironworks, the worst being James, Slag, Wormwood, the cruel foreman who drove men beyond their limits and, as some said, met a fittingly hellish demise. But Nathan wasn't a believer. Not yet. When his friend Tyler dared him to spend the night at the furnaces, Nathan scoffed. "Just another rusted-out landmark," he said. "Nothing haunted about it." Tyler smirked. "Then prove it." That was how Nathan found himself climbing the locked gate at midnight, armed only with a flashlight and his phone. The moment his feet hit the ground inside, a heavy silence wrapped around him. The city sounds faded. The air was thick, humid, metallic, suffocating. He moved deeper into the complex, past crumbling brick walls and twisted pipes. The massive furnaces loomed like rusted monsters, their iron bellies hollow but still whispering of past horrors. Nathan paused at the old blower room, its walls blackened by decades of soot. His flashlight flickered. "Oh, come on!" he muttered, slapping the side. A clank echoed from the darkness. Nathan spun, heart hammering. A metal tool had fallen from a rusted table. It hadn't been there before. The air grew hotter. His breath hitched. He turned toward the stairwell leading up to the catwalk, where, according to legend, Slag Wormwood had fallen to his death, his body consumed by molten iron. Workers claimed it wasn't an accident. He had pushed men too far, and they had pushed back. Nathan forced a laugh. "Just old pipes shifting," he told himself. "Nothing more." Then he heard the footsteps, heavy, measured, coming from above. His flashlight beam wavered as he aimed it up the metal stairs. Dust swirled in the air, but nothing was there, and yet, the footsteps continued. A deep, gravelly voice rumbled through the darkness. "Get back to work!" Nathan's blood ran cold. He hadn't imagined that. The catwalk creaked. Something moved. Then, with a shriek of rusted metal, the door to the upper furnace room slammed shut. Nathan bolted. He didn't care about proving anything anymore. He needed out. He ran back through the maze of machinery, past looming furnaces and rusted pipes, but the air grew hotter, thicker, choking him. The shadows twisted. Shapes moved within them. A metallic scrape echoed behind him, like a shovel dragging against steel. Nathan risked a glance over his shoulder, and his heart nearly stopped. A figure stood at the base of the stairs. A hulking man-shaped shadow, its features burned beyond recognition, its eyes smoldering like embers. It wore a tattered foreman's uniform, the insignia barely visible beneath decades of rust and soot. Slag Wormwood. Nathan's legs nearly gave out, but survival instinct kicked in. Run. The thing moved faster than it should. Heavy boots slammed against the steel floor, echoing through the chamber. Nathan lunged for the main gate, but it was locked tight. A voice boomed behind him. "Lazy workers deserve the furnace." Nathan turned just as the heat spiked to unbearable levels. The air shimmered like the edge of a firestorm. His skin prickled with burning pain, yet there were no flames. Just heat. Oppressive, suffocating, alive. Nathan's body weakened. His mind fogged. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was Slag Wormwood's scorched face looming over him. The AFTRMATH Tyler arrived at Sloss Furnaces the next morning, expecting to find Nathan gloating about his boring night. Instead, he found him collapsed near the gate, unconscious, his skin red with what looked like severe heat exposure. He called 911. The paramedics were baffled. No fires had burned in Sloss for decades, yet Nathan's body showed signs of intense heat stroke and minor burns. When Nathan woke up in the hospital, he couldn't speak at first. His mind was a haze of fire, shadows, and those terrible words. Lazy workers deserve the furnace. He never returned to Sloss. He never spoke of that night. But sometimes, in the dead of summer, when the heat pressed down like a smothering hand, he swore he could still hear the clang of metal and the screams of workers long dead, and worst of all, the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, and coming closer. Because Sloss Furnaces never truly shut down, the fire still burns, even in the dark. The haunting of Gaineswood, the heavy, humid air of an Alabama summer night clung to Olivia's skin as she pulled her car up the winding driveway of Gaineswood Plantation. The towering white-columned mansion stood beneath the moon's eerie glow, its grand facade hiding centuries of whispered secrets. She killed the engine and sat still, staring at the antebellum home before her. It was supposed to be a simple paranormal investigation, a passion project for her small but dedicated YouTube channel. Gaineswood was infamous, its halls echoing with the tragedies of the past. The stories of the ghostly lady in white, the disembodied whispers, and the eerie piano music had drawn her here. With a deep breath, Olivia grabbed her camera and flashlight, stepping out into the night. The crickets' chorus faded as she approached the house, replaced by an unnatural stillness. The front door was slightly ajar, as if the house had been expecting her. She pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by her presence. The grand entryway, though aged, still held an air of former opulence. Faded wallpaper, cracked marble floors, and chandeliers coated in cobwebs painted a picture of forgotten grandeur. As she lifted her camera, a whisper slithered through the air. "Turn back." Olivia froze. The voice, soft, almost mournful, seemed to come from nowhere. Her pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. She had been in haunted locations before. This was no different. At least, that's what she told herself. She moved deeper into the mansion, her footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. Each room she entered told a story. The dining hall, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now sat in eerie silence. The ballroom, where couples had twirled beneath candlelight, lay still, the shadows dancing where no music played. Then, she reached the parlor. A grand piano stood at the far end, its keys yellowed with age. Olivia knew the legend. People often reported hearing ghostly piano music echoing through the halls, a sorrowful melody played by unseen hands. She hesitated, then reached out and pressed a single key. A chilling gust of wind surged through the room, though the windows were closed. The candle sconces flickered, casting grotesque shadows along the walls. Then, the piano played a note on its own. Olivia gasped, stumbling backward as another key pressed down, then another. The melody was haunting, filled with sorrow. It was as if something, was here with her, reliving an old grief. She steadied her camera, whispering, "Is someone here?" Silence. Then, the temperature plummeted. Her breath turned visible, swirling in the cold air. A shadow formed in the corner of the room, elongating, shifting. Olivia's heart pounded as the shadow took shape, tall, draped in what looked like a flowing gown. A woman's face began to form, blurred and wavering. The lady in white. Olivia had read about her, the spirit of Evelyn Carter, a young woman who had once served at Gaineswood. Legend said she had died tragically in the home, either from a broken heart or mistreatment, and now she remained, bound to the mansion in death. The ghostly figure turned toward Olivia, hollow eyes locking onto hers. Then, she whispered, "You should not be here." A sudden pressure seized Olivia's chest, as if unseen hands were pressing against her ribs. Her vision blurred. Panic set in. She scrambled backward, barely able to breathe. She turned and bolted. Through the hall, past the dining room, toward the front door. But the door, it was closed. No, not just closed. It was locked. Her trembling fingers fumbled at the knob. Behind her, footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate. The air thickened with an oppressive energy. Then, the whispers came. Not one voice. Many. "She won't let you leave. You should have listened, you're hers now. Olivia's screams caught in her throat. She pounded on the door, kicking, clawing, until finally, it flung open. She stumbled into the night, falling onto the gravel driveway. For a moment, she lay there, gasping for air. The mansion loomed above her, silent once more. The whispers had faded. The cold had vanished. But when she looked back at the house, she saw her, standing in the doorway. The lady in white watched her, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raised one pale hand and waved goodbye. Olivia scrambled to her feet, jumped into her car, and sped down the driveway, never once looking back. The next day, she reviewed her footage. There was no piano music, no whispers, no ghostly figure. But at the very end of the video, as she ran for the door, the camera had captured one final frame: a woman in white, standing in the doorway, her hollow eyes staring straight into the lens. And behind her, shadowed figures filled the mansion, watching, waiting. Hell's Gate Bridge. The night air was thick with humidity as Tyler gripped the steering wheel of his old Chevy. The headlights cut through the dense Alabama fog, illuminating the cracked asphalt of the deserted road ahead. Beside him, his girlfriend, Emily, scrolled through her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler smirked. "Come on, Em. It's just a stupid urban legend. Drive onto the bridge, turn off the headlights, and supposedly you see ghosts. Sounds like a fun night to me." Emily exhaled sharply. "Yeah, fun. Until something follows us home." In the back seat, their friend Mark leaned forward. "Dude, this place is cursed," he said, his voice laced with excitement. "They say a couple drove off this bridge in the 1950s, and if you stop in the middle, their spirits appear in your car." "That's just a story," Tyler said, yet deep down, he wasn't so sure. He had heard the legends since childhood, how the bridge, with its rusted iron railings and crumbling foundation, was a gateway to something beyond this world. People swore that if you looked in the rearview mirror after turning off your lights, you'd see a pair of pale, wet figures sitting in the back seat. Others claimed the bridge led straight to hell itself. The car crept closer to the bridge. The headlights revealed warped wooden planks barely holding the structure together. Below, the murky water of the Chocolaco Creek swirled ominously. The road narrowed as Tyler hesitated. "You don't have to do this," Emily murmured. Tyler swallowed, forcing a chuckle. Too late to back out now. With a deep breath, he eased the car onto the bridge. The tires thudded against the aging wood. The bridge groaned beneath their weight. Tyler shifted the car into park, then reached for the headlights. "Ready?" "No," Emily whispered. He twisted the knob, and darkness swallowed them whole. Silence. Nothing but the chirp of crickets and the distant croak of frogs. The air in the car grew thick, heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. A shiver crawled up Tyler's spine. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, drip. A soft, wet sound. Drip. Drip. Emily sucked in a breath. "Did you hear that?" Tyler's hands tightened around the wheel. The sound came from the back seat. It was slow, deliberate, like water dripping from soaked fabric. Drip. Drip. Mark gasped. "What the hell?" Something moved behind them. Tyler's pulse pounded in his ears as he reached for the keys. He turned them, but the engine sputtered and died. A whisper filled the car, low, wet, unintelligible. Emily let out a shaky breath. "Tyler, turn on the lights." "Now." His fingers fumbled over the switch. A flicker. The headlights blazed to life, cutting through the darkness. The car was empty. Nothing but their own reflections staring back at them from the windows. Emily whimpered. "Let's go." "Please." Tyler didn't argue. He threw the car into reverse and stomped on the gas. The tires screeched against the wood as the car lurched backward off the bridge. Only when they reached solid ground did he allow himself to breathe. Emily wiped at her arms as if brushing off invisible hands. "I told you this was a bad idea." Mark turned, his face pale. "Did you guys see that?" Tyler's knuckles were white on the wheel. "See what?" Mark pointed to the rearview mirror. "Look." Tyler hesitated before glancing up. His breath hitched. Faint outlines of two figures sat in the back seat. Their faces were blurred, their skins slick with water. Dark, empty sockets where their eyes should have been. Then, they smiled. Tyler slammed his foot on the gas, the car fishtailing as they sped down the road. The mirrors shattered as an unseen force slammed into the back of the car. Emily screamed. Mark cursed. Tyler gritted his teeth, refusing to look back. They drove for miles, the oppressive air lifting only when they reached the city limits. Tyler didn't stop until they were parked outside Emily's house. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Emily turned to Tyler. Did you see them? He nodded slowly. Yeah. Mark exhaled. So what now? Tyler shook his head. We never talk about this again. Emily didn't argue. She climbed out of the car and hurried inside without looking back. Tyler and Mark sat in silence. Then, drip. Tyler's blood ran cold. Mark's eyes widened as he lifted a trembling hand to his cheek. A single drop of ice-cold water trickled down his skin. Tyler's heart pounded. He turned his head slowly, just in time to see something move in the back seat. The last thing he heard before the world went black. A wet, gurgling laugh. The haunting of Drish House, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, had its fair share of ghost stories, but none as persistent, or as terrifying, as the one surrounding the Drish house. The grand, crumbling mansion had stood for nearly 2 centuries, its once majestic columns now cracked, its windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. For years, the townspeople whispered about the lights that flickered in the topmost tower at night. Some claimed they heard disembodied voices, others saw spectral figures staring down from the windows. But it wasn't until Emily Foster, a young journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, decided to investigate that the full horror of the house revealed itself. Chapter 1. The assignment. Emily had always been fascinated by ghost stories, so when her editor tasked her with writing an in-depth article on Alabama's most haunted locations, she knew where to begin. The Drish house had everything she needed: a tragic history, eerie folklore, and most importantly, decades of reported hauntings. Dr. John R. Drish, a wealthy but deeply troubled man, had built the house in the 1830s. His love for grandeur was only matched by his obsession with death. He had demanded an elaborate funeral when he passed, but legend said that his wishes were ignored, and his angry spirit never left the mansion. His wife, Sarah, had been consumed by grief and, according to rumor, had spent her final days lighting candles in the tower, waiting for a funeral that never came. The locals swore that Sarah's spirit still lingered, searching for the ceremony that never was. Emily packed her camera, voice recorder, and flashlight before heading out. She had secured permission to stay overnight in the house, an opportunity no other journalist had dared to take. Chapter 2. First signs. The Drish house loomed before her, its silhouette monstrous against the twilight sky. As she stepped through the front door, the air turned thick, heavy with dust and the scent of something old, decay and candle wax. The first few hours were uneventful. She walked the creaking halls, snapping photos of peeling wallpaper and grand staircases long abandoned. She even recorded herself narrating the history of the house, her voice bouncing eerily off the empty rooms. But then, as midnight approached, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature plummeted, and a faint scratching sound echoed through the hall. Emily spun, her flashlight slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Then came the whispers. Faint, indistinct. She strained to listen, but the words slipped through her ears like smoke. Taking a deep breath, she decided to climb the staircase leading to the third-floor tower, where Sarah Drish was rumored to have lit her morning candles. Chapter 3. The tower room. The tower was just as unsettling as she expected, dust-covered, with cobwebbed chandeliers and a circular window that overlooked the town below. Then she saw them. 3 unlit candles stood in the center of the room, arranged in a triangle. Her breath caught. Had they been there earlier? Had she somehow missed them? She knelt, reaching out to touch the wax when a loud bang shattered the silence. The door had slammed shut. Emily scrambled to her feet, her pulse hammering. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. Then, a flickering light appeared in the reflection of the window. Spinning around, she saw it. One of the candles had lit itself. Emily's breath hitched as the temperature dropped even further. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing inside the room itself. Then, the second candle ignited. Terror gripped her. She fumbled for her camera, trying to document the phenomenon, but her hands shook too violently. The whispering grew louder, turning into hushed sobs. "Sarah!" Suddenly, a shadowy figure materialized in the corner. It was a woman in a tattered, old-fashioned dress, her face hidden beneath a dark veil. Emily stumbled back. I'm just here to document the history of the house," she stammered. The figure lifted a hand, pointing at the third candle. "No!" Emily whispered. The candle burst into flames, and the entire room plunged into chaos. The walls seemed to breathe, the windows shattered outward, and a deafening wail filled the air. Emily screamed, covering her ears as an unseen force slammed her to the floor. Shadows swirled around her, forming grotesque shapes, faces twisted in agony, mouths gaping as if screaming for help. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the chaos ceased. Emily gasped for air, her entire body shaking. The candles were gone, and the tower was silent once more. Chapter 4: The Final Revelation. Emily didn't sleep that night. Instead, she huddled in the hallway, waiting for dawn. When the first light of morning streamed through the broken windows, she forced herself to go back into the tower. It was empty. No candles. No shattered glass. Had it all been a hallucination? She gathered her things and rushed out of the house, vowing never to return. But before she left, she took one last photo of the Drish house. Days later, when she finally developed the image, her heart nearly stopped. There, standing in the window of the third-floor tower, was Sarah Drish, watching her leave. Her veiled face was barely visible, but her eyes burned with sorrow and rage. Emily deleted the photo. Some things weren't meant to be uncovered, and some spirits, like Sarah Drish, were never meant to rest. And there you have it, 5 of the most haunted locations in Alabama. Would you dare to visit any of these places alone in the dead of night? Have you experienced any ghostly encounters yourself? Let us know in the comments below. And if you crave more tales of terror, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay curious, and stay scared.